Test, test, test. Am I working?
Sounds
I was
good.
having I was having technical difficulties with the microphone. I'm like, what? So anyway, let's see here. Now that I know this is working, um, there's like some new features here on Zoom that I haven't noticed
Oh,
before. There's something about a meeting group chat. And so I guess this is a new update or whatever. I'm not really sure. But anyway, let me go ahead and make sure that you're set up as co-host. Yes. And everything. And Kristen, bless her heart, who's been waiting here in the waiting room, she's been really wanting to participate. We're getting all sorts of emails and everything. So I'm like, wow,
well
okay.
then, I'm so glad that it's a remote one and I didn't need to cancel and we're just gonna roll
Yeah,
right
and it
in.
just worked out well for everything. So I'm glad we made it an online program too, and then the next one for October. So, but
Yes,
that kind of makes sense because, everybody's getting used to each other's germs again now that school started back and all
exactly.
of that. So,
Uh,
yeah.
it's like that time of year with the temperature change too, and
Well, I'm glad to see you're using your teacup.
yes, ma'am, got it right here.
Oh my golly, that's so great. And it's a good size too.
Oh yeah, I know. I'm like,
Yeah.
that's definitely more than a what is it, 8 ounce or whatever the standard.
You can
Um,
get lots of mileage out of your tea bag.
hmm,
Oh
perfect.
my gosh, that is so great. Let's see here. Now, what I'm also noticing here is usually there's a place for me to start the oh, it's already recording.
Oh
Whoops.
wow.
Welcome, everybody. Thanks for coming today for STEAM 101 Sewing Basics. I'm your facilitator today, Christy Buchanan Wellman, and our presenter and sewing maven is Sydney Markham. I'll be handling the chat today so that Sydney can present. And if you have any questions, feel free to either ask over the microphone or you could also use the chat window, whatever you're most comfortable with. So again, our coverage is going to be on an introduction to sewing machines and things to consider when purchasing and using a machine of your own. Just a quick review of some Zoom features. Whenever you log in, you're automatically muted by default. We do encourage folks to use video. Um, it helps make for a more intimate and closer experience, and also especially if you have questions, it's easier if we can see what your question is. If you don't want to show yourself with your portrait profile, you can also just turn your camera down so that we can see what you have the question with on the sewing machine if that makes you more comfortable. And also you can post your questions via chat. Um, this program will be recorded today because we have had a lot of requests for the Sewing Basics program. So that way, if someone missed it today, or if you want to go back and review, it will be available on the library's website. It might take about a week before it gets posted on there. Most of the time, the team is really good about getting it up in about 3 days. And then it'll be posted on the library's YouTube channel if you want to go back and review. And as always, thank you for your support of Charlotte Mecklenburg Library and Independence Regional Library. And so with that, without further ado, I will turn it over to Sydney so she can start with the program.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. So I'm Sydney. I actually used to work at Independence Regional Library, and left to join my full-time career as a social worker. But I've been sewing for on a machine for 12 years by hand. I think I learned when I was a little kid. It's just a hobby of mine. I'm by no means a seamstress or an alterationist. But hopefully if you have any questions today, I can answer them. I mostly sew clothing, occasionally bags or, household projects. But today we'll be going over, and I'll share my screen. some sewing machine basics. So if you, like Tammy, have a sewing machine that you've never used, or it's been a very long time since you've dusted it off, hopefully today will be that inspiration to kind of get started. And then let me go ahead and share my screen. Okay. Here we go. Slideshow. So again, today is just kind of an overview of the different parts of a sewing machine, some of the uses for them, and some things you might want to consider if you're looking to purchase one soon yourself. So first we'll start with the different parts of the sewing machine. I'll go over them using this slide, and then I'll actually show you all on my sewing machine. So every sewing machine will have these same parts. They might look a little bit different, be in slightly different places. For example, Tammy's machine is computerized, so that round stitch selection option for her will actually be a computer. But every sewing machine kind of will go from top to bottom. You have in your upper right hand your bobbin winder, which the bobbin is where you're under the thread that goes on the bottom. That's how you wind it. So then we have our spool holder, which of course is where your thread goes. Thread tension is how you adjust your upper thread. So that's the thread that sits in the spool holder. The thread take up lever, you'll see, I'll show you in just a minute how to thread a sewing machine. There's like a little part that you click it through. The reverse button, this one is typically in different spots depending on the brand and the machine, but with the Singer, it's usually right up front. As you go down, you of course see your needle, your presser foot, which is the piece that holds your fabric in place and lets it run through. And then your bobbin, which again is, you have your top thread and your bottom thread. So your bobbin is your bottom thread. And then the hand wheel over on the right side, that's very helpful if you're trying to get some very small, precise stitches. And then, of course, your stitch length and your stitches. So now I'll go ahead and move my camera so that hopefully y'all can get a great view. Okay. So this is my machine. It's a Singer Tradition. I've had it for 10 years now. I've actually never had to service it. Same light bulb that I've originally had. If you need to, there's of course always videos online. There's your manual, or you can always take it to a sewing machine repair store. But I have been very fortunate in that I have not had to do that. So we'll start, go ahead and unthread that. We'll start today by threading a bobbin. So this is the first step that you need to take if you want to start sewing on your machine. Again, every machine is a little bit different, but you can see here on my machine, this is the presser foot. So this is where when you actually sew, your fabric goes. And most bobbins sit either, there will be a little plastic piece that you can kind of pop out, or like mine actually have storage built in. And then my bobbin actually sits in here. Let's see if I can get. So this is what the bobbin holder looks like. And the bobbin is typically a little piece of plastic or metal. If it's a much older vintage machine, it might even be wood. But for the most part, nowadays they're plastic, and you can get replacements at, Joann's, Michael's, even Walmart. So to wind a bobbin, go ahead and grab an empty one. Most of them will have at least two little holes on them. So you can see here, it's a little hard to see, but that right there it might not focus since it's clear, but there is a very small little hole. And that is where, when we use our thread, we're actually going to slip it through there. So we'll take our thread and slip it through whichever hole of the bobbin. It doesn't matter. With my plastic ones, some of them are a little bit cheaper, and only one of the holes is punched out. If you have metal bobbins, you probably don't need to worry about that. So then our thread will go up on the thread holder there, you can see. So it's just a little place for your spool to go. And then most will come with a little stopper. This just prevents, especially as you're sewing quickly and this thread is really spinning, it prevents it from popping off. So now you can see we have our bobbin, we have our thread, and we need to take it over here. And on my machine, there's actually instructions, which is very helpful. I'm not sure that all machines have this, but this is kind of considered a beginner basic model. So if we're going to thread our bobbin, wind our bobbin, we'll slip it through our thread through this little notch there. It's a little metal loop that'll hold our thread in place, and then wind it clockwise around this piece, which also catches that thread. And now you can go ahead and just place it right there, right on top. Most bobbin winders will be at the top of the machine. They might have a slightly different process as far as securing your thread. And mine, so that okay, so my machine is turned on. There's a presser foot, or sorry, a foot down at the bottom, which controls my power. So when I go ahead and do that, you can see my needle moves. When I push my bobbin winder over into place, you can see again, wonderful instructions on this particular machine. When I push it to the right, now, instead of moving my needle, it actually moves my bobbin winder. So my machine, a fun little quirk after 10 years is that I need to kind of help this process out. So I have to manually twist it a few times, just because for whatever reason, the plastic bobbins just don't fit quite right on the bobbin winder. So I have to get the thread on there a few times so that there's enough tension that it'll actually spin. But once I have that, so I'm holding I have an extra couple inches of thread. I like to pull up again to help with my machine's bobbin winder tension. And then once I do that, I also kind of hold the thread here to guide it, because sometimes as you're winding the bobbin, it'll go too low and get tangled beneath your bobbin, which you definitely do not want. Yeah. So now you can see, maybe I should have chosen something other than gray thread. It's not the most poppin'. But you can see I do have some thread now on my bobbin. You would want to wind this, especially if you were working on a large project, as full as you can. If you know, maybe, okay, I'm working on a smaller project, I shouldn't need too much of this thread on my bobbin. You can do a smaller amount like I've done here. And when you're ready, you just go ahead, snip that, slide it back over so that next time you use your presser, it'll work your needle instead of your bobbin winder. And now we have a threaded bobbin. So our next step, of course, is to thread our sewing machine and then make sure that we have our bobbin thread. So before I go into that, I will show you all a little bit about thread tension, just so you understand when you're sewing, you know, as I mentioned, there's your top thread up here and then your bobbin thread down below. So tension is probably the most important part and possibly the trickiest part, especially on a new machine, of getting comfortable with sewing. Because if your thread tension is uneven, your stitches are just gonna look a little bit wonky. So I'll show you all a visual of this. There we go. So our thread tension, as I mentioned, we have upper thread and our lower thread. So for most machines, there is a little dial. For my machine, it's up at the top. And you can see the higher the number, the higher the tension. The lower the number, the lower the tension. So if your upper thread is too loose, that means more likely than not, your bottom thread is just going to be kind of gently hanging on to your fabric. It's not really a secure stitch. But if it's too tight, it's actually going to pull that bottom thread all the way up, and then you have the reverse problem. So when your tension is balanced, it should look like your stitches are almost identical, both on the top of your fabric and the bottom. And this is just a guide for adjusting your top thread tension. I'll show you in just a minute. Again, every machine is a little bit different when it comes to the bobbins. I actually very recently learned how to adjust my machine's bobbin tension. The machines I learned to sew on, they were very nice. It was at my high school. They were Husqvarna Vikings. They're about $700 machines, and they had an automated bobbin tension manager. So I had to learn on my $100 machine how to adjust the tension. So you can see here, this is what holds the bobbin. There's a little cavity for it to go in, just like that. And then on the side here, see if it'll focus. It's very small, but right there, there is a little screw. So I have a tool in my machine, which allows me to adjust that, as well as, so there's some other components. You can see here, I can unscrew this. So this would be great if your thread got clogged, or even just for basic maintenance. You will be surprised by the amount of dust and debris that comes just from sewing. So there will be a little bit of clogs in the back here, so you can open this up and clean your motor. You can also use it to adjust this here. This is what holds my needle in place. I'll show you that a little bit later. And now, so I have this small tool here. You can see this edge would be great for these larger screws. And then there's this tiny little one that's maybe 1/8 of an inch wide that is used to adjust the tension on my bobbin holder. So the way that I would do that, again, every machine is slightly different. However, if you have a machine that's a little bit lower tech, doesn't have a computer, more likely than not, this is going to be how you adjust it. So I would just turn, and it's probably going to be really hard to see just because it's pretty small and I don't think this camera is going to want to focus on it. But I would just take this tool here and slightly adjust that little screw that I showed you all. You know, righty tighty, lefty loosey. So if you noticed, similarly to with your upper thread tension, that maybe the bobbin was pulling either too much or too little, you can adjust it. And something I learned with my machine, so the way you thread it is you pop it in there and you want to make sure that your thread is moving against the, so there's a small notch here right there, and that's going to catch my thread. So I want to make sure that my thread is going essentially counterclockwise to that little notch. Once it catches in that notch, you'll pull it and it'll sit right in here. There is a little hollow. So the notch catches it, it slides under this metal piece, which can be adjusted by this tension, by this screw, and then it stays in place right there. And the way you know that, at least for my machine, that the tension is good is you hold it by the string, and if you go like it should not drop. So essentially, if it were to drop, I would know that that thread tension was much too loose. You want to see just the slightest. So when I let it drop, I can feel it tug for a second, but then it catches. So that's how I know that my bobbin tension is good. You might have to adjust this depending on the project you're working on.
And speaking of bobbin tension, Jen did ask, why would you need to adjust the bobbin tension?
So I will show you in just a second. I'm going to intentionally adjust my tension to where it's not ideal, and then show you those stitches. You know, that visual shows you, but it's, to me, it's better to see it on a piece of fabric. Bobbin tension, sometimes adjusting your top tension is not enough, because again, if your bobbin tension is way too loose, even if you're adjusting this up here, your stitches are still going to be a little uneven. Ideally, you want both pieces, both your lower and your upper thread, at an ideal tension to where you just need to adjust it slightly depending on, you know, maybe the weight of your fabric. Again, bobbin tension is when you don't really need to adjust as frequently. However, I realized, again, after years of sewing, that I kept having the same issue on lighter weight fabrics to where my bobbin tension was way too tight. So it was making the fabric pucker. And I'll show you all. So we have our bobbin. Mine just slides right into place. You can see right there, a little piece, and it slides on. There's also, let me try using a flashlight. There's also a tiny little notch right there. So that is where this piece of the bobbin holder lines up. So that's how you know that it's lined up perfectly. If you have a different machine or the bobbin sits up top, your manual will definitely have instructions. And I know that it's in when I hear that click. To remove it, I would just pull, there's a little tab here, metal tab to remove it. So once we have our bobbin in there, we need to thread our machine. And today I'm going to use different color top and bottom threads just for you guys to see the tension, hopefully. Of course, normally when you're sewing, you would want your upper and your lower threads to match. So threading the machine is pretty simple. We already have it through this little thread catcher here. We'll take it around, down, and again, mine has numbers. So step 1, step 2 is down. Step 3, you bring it around and up. And then, so there is a thread catcher in here. Right now, you can't see it because my needle position is down. So I'm going to turn my presser, the stitch turner, to where the presser or the thread catcher comes up. So you can see it's just a little piece of metal. There's just a little bit of room for the thread to come through, and mine actually not accidentally, it already came through, so I want to show you all. So it's up here. You would just bring it to the right, around, and then down. And now that is holding our thread in place. So when we come down to our needle, there is then one more place where our thread needs to be tucked in. So right above my needle, there's a little piece of metal. You just need to slide it around. And then we thread our needle. So now that you have your needle threaded, you want to hold on to the thread and then turn the needle dial so that the needle goes down and up just once. So that catches our bobbin thread. And when we pull up, that thread is now up top.
Kristen also had a question.
Yes.
She said in the last sewing class I took at the library, they used a Singer heavy duty. What is the difference between that and the Singer traditional?
So the main difference between the heavy duty, which is actually the one I just purchased last week, is that the heavy duty has a stronger motor. I'm going to show you all the box. It's actually sitting right next to me. So this is a Singer heavy duty. There are many different models. This one I actually got from Costco. Who knew? It was a great deal. So it has a heavier motor, and it's designed to, and as well as the presser foot, it can handle thicker fabric. So essentially, if you wanted to do any sewing with canvases, denim, any heavyweight fabrics, or if you know you're going to be sewing very regularly, you might want to consider a heavy duty model. They are a little bit more expensive. This one was about, well, it was a good deal. It was about $170. Usually at Joann's or Michael's, costs will run you anywhere from like $230 to $400, depending on the sale. So again, this one is kind of their standard beginner model. I think right now, most of the time it runs at about $130 to $150. This one has everything you need if you're getting into sewing. If you're maybe looking to start out and you know you're going to be sewing frequently or a little more advanced already, you can look into some of the more higher tech or sturdier models. But again, I've had this machine for 10 years. I'm a hobby sewist, so that means, you know, anywhere from 5 to 10 garment projects a year. So it doesn't get as much use as maybe someone who sews professionally or has a side business, or even a quilter. Oh, and that's something we'll talk about. If you are a quilter, there are some other things to consider as well when you're choosing a machine. Good questions. Thank you all. So you can see I've slid my little my little storage unit back in place. So I'm going to adjust the thread tension purposefully to where it's both very tight and very loose so that you all can see what it looks like when your tension is incorrect and why and how to fix it. So now I'll go over and I'll select my stitch length. For my machine, I typically sew around 2, maybe a little bit between the 2 and the 3 for my stitch length. I'll show you all some examples of that as well, what it looks like, different reasons why you would maybe want to use different stitches or stitch lengths. And then I also need to consider where my needle.
Can I pause you for a second?
Yes.
I have to ask a question. I put my bobbin in and I'm trying to get it to come up. I threaded my stuff like you said, but it won't catch my
Yes.
thread on the bottom.
Exactly. So your machine, is your bobbin, does it
It's
sit
flat. It
Yep.
lays flat. It's not like that like yours.
Yes. Gosh, that's the kind of machine I learned to sew on, but it's been a very long time.
So it has, it shows which way the thread is supposed to go. So it has like a little diagram here. And then I put it through, like the little diagram shows me, and then I'm twisting to get the thread to come up, and the needle goes up and down, and the thread's coming, appropriately. I'll move my computer so you can see. Like the thread's coming appropriately through the needle, but it's not pulling any of this.
Yep. So your bobbin thread is not catching and pulling up to where your fabric will lay.
So yeah, so there's no thread coming up through. And what am I doing wrong?
You might be, so truthfully, the best answer is probably going to be either looking it up with knowing which specific model of machine you have, or if you have the instruction manual or user manual sitting near you, that should also have the instructions on how to pull that up. I was going to say, without seeing, again, because I don't have that machine myself. And that is why truly every machine is slightly different. The concepts are all the same. But until you are super comfortable with your machine, Google and that manual will be your best friend. So I see you're turning the knob too.
Yeah, and it's giving me an error message, which
okay, so that is also a potential downside to the computerized ones, is sometimes they think they're smarter than you. And you might be trying to just do something manually.
Yeah, I'm not smarter than the machine. The machine's definitely knows way more than I do at this point.
Do you have the manual sitting near you? Because I would recommend
kind of looking at the manual.
If it has like this is how you thread your machine and get the bobbin thread to the top.
All right.
All right. Let me know if the answer is in the manual. If not, we can maybe even do a little troubleshooting right now where we look up the model. And again, YouTube is a wonderful resource.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. It has 3 manuals here. And a DVD.
Oh yes. Yeah, I'm not sure how many folks actually use those. I personally don't know where mine is.
Threading the machine.
So hopefully.
Is that probably there? Threading the machine.
Threading, I would think it'll either be threading the machine, or it might be even more specific around we already wound the bobbin.
Lower threading, upper threading, drawing up the lower thread. So
that is exactly what you need to go. All right, well, Tammy is reading her user manual, like a good sewing machine owner. I'll show you again. So my tension, my upper thread tension can be adjusted up here. So 9, this will be really, really tight. If I go to 0, it's going to be very, very loose. So I'll do a couple stitches. Again, mine is manual, so I just select the type of stitch I want. And don't worry, we'll go over different stitches and their uses momentarily. So for now, I'm just showing thread tension. Because again, if you don't have your thread tension right, it doesn't matter what you're sewing, it's probably not going to hold. So I'll lower my presser foot. On my machine, there's a lever in the back. This just holds your fabric in place. So again, this was tension on 0. You can see here, hopefully, that red thread. So my oops, someone's in the waiting room. So that my red thread, which is my lower thread, is just really sitting on top of that fabric. I don't know if it'll focus there. See if I can get it to. Let's try. So that red thread, which is our lower thread, is incredibly loose. So if you are currently at home using your own sewing machine, feel free to play around with this as I am. Again, I set my upper thread tension to 0. So this is expected. And I can actually, in just a second. So because this is so loose, I can actually take my red thread and just pretty much just pull it straight through. It's ripping all these stitches up. And when we turn it over, we see there's a little bit of puckering. So that is with the upper tension very loose. So now I'll adjust it to where it's really tight. And then we'll put it right in the middle. And most it's built in, like you want to be somewhere in this middle range, and they even have it marked somewhere between 3 and 5. Again, 9 would be incredibly tight. This might be useful if for some reason you wanted your fabric to pucker. So this one, you can see, yeah, it's already puckering. So that's what happens when your tension, either the upper or your lower thread tension is too tight. It's gonna make your fabric do that, which is not ideal. You can kind of see, hopefully, let's see if that works. So I don't know if it's very obvious, but you can actually see your lower thread peeking through the other side. So there's little red dots all along here. Because again, your upper thread is too tight. So it's pulling that bobbin thread down through the fabric, whereas you want it to really be level. So neither of these are an ideal tension. For my machine, ideal tension is usually around 4. Sometimes a little bit lower or higher depending on the weight of the fabric. So typically for me, a lighter weight fabric needs a slightly looser tension because it's more delicate and you don't want your thread pulling too tightly on it. So now for this one, you can see there's no puckering. You can't see the other thread. When you flip it over, both sides, both of the stitches look very similar. That is how you know your tension is correct. Again, the top of your fabric and the bottom of your fabric should really look almost identical as far as the stitching. So that is why tension, thread tension is so important. And any questions around that? Okay. If not, and of course, if you have questions at any point, jump in. We'll discuss different types of stitches on machines and potential uses for them. Let me show you all. Thank you. So these are just some possible stitches that you might have on your machine. These are actually the exact stitches that I have on my personal machine. The fancier the machine you have, more likely to have more stitches, especially if you are looking to quilt with your machine. There will probably be a wider variety, but for your basic sewing, really all you need is this A stitch. That is the one that I've been using, which is just a standard stitch. G on the bottom here, I use this to finish raw seams and raw edges. So if you've ever looked at the inside of your clothing, especially like the inside of a t-shirt, on those side seams, you'll see like it's called overlocking. That's what this stitch is. There are professional machines called sergers that will do this for you, but those machines typically run anywhere from 250 at the lowest to thousands. So as a home sewist, to me, that's not worth it unless you are sewing all your own clothing or owning a business. But so A and G are my most frequently used stitches. As you can see, some of these are a little bit decorative, so we'll have a little bit of fun and I'll show you one of those. We've already seen A. That's the most commonly used one. And then I'll show you G and what that looks like on a raw seam or raw edge, excuse me. Another
And
one.
while you're doing that, I'm so sorry. I didn't mean
No,
to
you're
interrupt you, Sydney. But Kristen had another question. She
yes,
wanted
yes.
to know, what does S1 mean?
So S1 on my machine, let me just show you. Let me go ahead and stop sharing. So on my machine, again, because it's a manual, you can see each of these on this wheel, there are two different stitches next to each other. So the way you switch between them for my machine is if it's a stitch in black, you want to make sure you're adjusting the stitch length and it's in black. If you want to switch it over to S1, that means you're working with that blue stitch. So which in this case, as I mentioned, the overlock stitch is S1. So it's just, I guess, Singer one. It doesn't mean anything. I don't think it means anything outside of a Singer sewing machine. But for this particular model and quite a few of their other ones, you'll get to manually select your stitches. And that's kind of how you differentiate between the two stitches at each point on the wheel. Good question. Okay, so I've selected my overlock stitch. I've changed my stitch length to S1. So a nice part about those stitches is the machine actually automatically knows what length to make them. So you don't need to worry about adjusting the stitch length. One thing you do need to consider is your stitch width. So right now my needle is in the middle, position is at 0. For the overlock stitch, you want it to be definitely a bit wider. I typically put it to 5. That'll make that stitch about, I would say, just under 1/4 of an inch wide. But you can make it smaller as needed, especially if you were working with a smaller seam allowance, which is the amount of material between your stitch and the edge of your fabric. If you are sewing, especially using patterns, and especially American patterns for whatever reason, the average seam allowance is typically 5/8 of an inch. But you will definitely possibly have projects where it's a lot smaller than that. And for that reason, you might need to make your stitch width a little bit smaller. Okay. So again, we'll just go ahead and put our presser foot down. For this stitch, I'm treating it as if I were finishing the inside of a pair of pants. So I'm just going to go ahead and make sure that my fabric is lined up with the edge of my presser foot. So you can see here too, there's little notches. So this is how you know how wide it is. So this one is 4/8 of an inch. This one is 5/8. So again, if you were sewing on a standard pattern, you would want to sew in line with this guide. But for this purpose, we're just going to line it up with the edge of the presser foot. So you can see here, this is our overlock stitch. This is a stitch that for the longest time, until I figured out how to adjust my bobbin tension, for the longest time, this stitch didn't look quite right on both sides for me. But you can see here, it's like a little zigzag. So because it has that stitching across the top and the bottom and in between, this is a great way to finish your seams. You don't need any special tools or machines for this. This is a stitch that will come with a beginner model. And I think there are some that are even like smaller and simpler than this, like maybe like marketed towards youth or traveling, but this should be included. It is my favorite way to finish my seams because it's quick, it's easy, and it lasts a long time. So that one is incredibly useful. I will, just for fun, here, let me ask y'all to chime in. So I actually have almost never used my decorative stitches. So again, these are the stitches on my machine. Is there any stitch in particular that someone would like to see?
I don't have a response yet, Sydney.
I'm,
Okay.
I want to see, so it's S1A.
Okay.
How does that look? Does it
We're
look
about
like
to find-
3 stitches in a row and then?
Yes.
Wow.
And some of these, let me think about it, especially in your manual, they'll have like a stitch guide. It'll give you a recommended width and length. Again, for the S1, I don't need to adjust my length, but my width, again, with the overlock stitch, I could have made it a lot skinnier. So we're gonna find out, Tammy, because truthfully, I don't use this stitch.
Yeah, I know. I was like, I've never seen that before. And it's on my machine too, but I'm like, wow, that's pretty.
The only thing I can think of, it might be nice for gathering, which I'll show you all in a second, basting.
Right, yeah. That makes sense.
But we'll try this. I'm gonna put my width at 3. It seems like it needs a little bit more room. And here we go.
Wild.
All right. So looking at this, I'm thinking this would be great if you needed a heavier duty seam. Because it really just put them all right next to each other. See the other side.
Right, something that's gonna come apart easily if it's
Yeah,
not
so
like
that's
super secure.
I say that's kind of nice, especially maybe if you were sewing like a heavyweight bag and you wanted thicker stitching, or even
Yeah,
like a
yep.
decorative top stitch. That kind of looks nice. Okay. Well, thank you for choosing our fun stitch, Tammy.
And see, Kristen was also interested in the S1. I guess that's the S1L or the S1I. I can't tell what it is.
Oh yeah, it's like the little X's. Okay, we'll give that one a try. And again, with the S1s, for the most part, the width, for the most part, you're going to want a wider width. So for this one, I'll do a 5.
Oh, she said it's the I, the S1I.
Thank you. Thank you, Kristen. I like this. Okay. There we go. That's really pretty. Something like this, I think would probably be great if you were doing like a decorative hem, like, a nice little, like, I don't know, lightweight blouse or dress, and you wanted a little bit of decorative top stitching. I think that would be beautiful. So that's truthfully what a lot of these, decorative looking stitches are. That's their purpose. I'm not a quilter, so I can't speak to whether or not they'd be used for quilting, but possibly. And then there is one other stitch. I don't personally use it. I know how to use it. So I'll show you all where it is on the, go ahead and share my screen briefly. So this stitch can be used to do a rolled hem. Some of those, I think E and F, depending on, I guess, which way your hem is facing. So it would be, you see how there's like the peaks, the little jagged pieces that stick up. That would be essentially, it would catch the tiniest bit of fabric on your hem, and it would like hold it in place. When we do our hand sewing skills, we do a stitch very similar to this. I don't mind doing this stitch by hand. It creates a very professional looking hem. On a machine, it is a little bit fussy. You definitely have to play with your stitch width a lot. So that's the only other stitch that, again, I don't like using it, but you very well could use it, especially if you were garment sewing. But the rest of them, seam finishing, decorative stitching, you can have a little bit of fun with it. So again, you don't even need the fanciest machine to get a little bit of the fun top stitching embroidery style stitches. So that's pretty fun. So the next thing I'll show you all is a basting stitch. So this is just your standard stitch. So I'll switch my machine back, make sure my needle is at the middle point again. And then for my length, I'm going to put it all the way to 4. So my stitch length goes from 0 to 4. So I have it on 4, which means this stitch is going to be long.
Oh, and Kristen
exactly
had another question. I'm so sorry. She asked, so the fancier stitches are not hard to do necessarily. It's just a different setting on the machine.
Yes, exactly. So they don't, like, truthfully, I didn't need to do anything. I just turned that knob and threaded my fabric through. The only thing you might need to consider, again, tension for a stitch like this, or even this, might just look a little bit different than your standard stitch tension. But you'll know, like, if you were to get finished with this decorative stitch, and all of the pieces were loose or one side looked significantly different than the other, then you might need to adjust and see what looks better. I always recommend as you sew to keep some scraps of whatever fabric you're working with so that you can kind of test out how those stitches are going to work on the fabric of your project before you get to the project itself, and then end up having to rip them out because you don't like the way it looks. So yes, no, they're nothing difficult. It's just changing those dials, maybe playing with your stitch length and width to where it looks the way you want it to look. Sewing machines really do all the hard work for us. It's great. Okay, thank you, Krista. So I just grabbed a new sheet of fabric just because I was running out of room there. But I'll show you all a basting stitch, and it has a couple different purposes. So again, I have this, my stitch length on the longest setting. You can see, maybe not, it really does not love picking up those tiny details. But there is, so these stitches are a lot longer. They're about, I'd say about 1/4 of an inch. So this is great when you are sewing two pieces of fabric together and you need them to stay in place and you don't want to just use your pins or those little clips are becoming very popular now. So this is a stitch that is meant to be removed. So that's why I didn't do anything to secure it on either end. If I were sewing some clothing together, this stitch would probably be done at a smaller seam allowance. And then my real stitch would be done below it, and I would possibly rip that basting stitch out, or it would be hidden. Another use for the basting stitch, if you turn your fabric to the side where your bobbin thread is, and you pull just on one end of the bobbin thread, you can get a gather. So again, if you're sewing anything that requires gathering, this is how you would do it. You would do your basting stitch, so your longest machine stitch, and you would pull on that bobbin thread to get that gather. So that stitch has two purposes. Again, it's one you'll probably use, especially if you sew any clothing pretty frequently. And you don't need to secure that stitch on either end. And I will show you now how to secure a stitch because we haven't talked about that yet. So for, again, you're sewing a standard stitch, standard seam, you would have your stitch length for my machine about 2.5, your needle in the middle position. So when you set your needle down, you want to go a few stitches and then you want to go backwards. So I have a reverse switch right up front. Some of the computerized machines will actually do this automatically for you, or they might have a setting over here or on the side. But a lot of the lower tech machines, it's just going to be right up front. Hold this down. And my needle actually came unthreaded there. But so that the whole point of doing a back stitch is to just secure that seam. That's really all you need. You don't need to worry about any fancy stitches or tying any knots. Back stitching, even just once, will actually let you have a secure seam. Here we go. And that happens sometimes where your thread will come unthreaded. It's unfortunate when you're working on a larger project and you realize that that happened a long time ago and you've been sewing, or if your bobbin thread runs out. But so let me show that again. Again, a few stitches, reverse switch down, back stitch. We'll do the same thing when we get to the edge of our fabric. I typically do about a 1/2 inch of back stitching. You can see it is just slightly thicker there on each end. Again, you shouldn't need to do this more than once, so just forward, back, and then at the end, usually I'll do forward again. It just makes it a little bit easier to snip your loose threads. So those stitches, again, the one I just showed you will be the one you use most frequently. The overlock stitch is one you can use to finish raw edges on your projects. We saw a couple of the interesting and decorative stitches. You can play around with that and see what you would maybe want to use them for. And then, of course, our basting stitch allows us to temporarily hold fabric in place or gather it. So those are the ones that you'll truthfully use most frequently. Now we're going to, and again, if anyone has any other questions, any other stitches they're curious about, please ask. Next, I will be talking about maintenance. So again, I mentioned that I've actually had this sewing machine for 10 years now. The maintenance I've had to do on it is pretty minimal, thankfully. And as long as you kind of keep up with these pieces, your machine will hopefully outlast you a really long time. I mean, I think most of us, I think Tammy was talking about that, her grandma had a machine. I say my mom had a vintage machine. They will last a really long time. Now you can find them, I'm gonna say I see them in thrift stores all the time. So one of the most basic pieces, and one that you'll probably have to do the most frequently, is changing the needles. Most of the time you need to change them when they break. This is kind of scary. It'll happen occasionally, especially if you are like me and you have a bad habit of sewing over your pins. Every now and then it'll hit a pin and it'll break. You can tell when they're becoming dull, truthfully, by kind of looking at them, or if you notice that maybe your fabric is kind of snagging. Cleaning, I'll show you again how to do that. I mentioned, there's kind of those cavities around the bobbin and the motor itself. And then there is a light bulb, which again, I'm really grateful that I haven't had to actually replace my light bulb, which is, I think, kind of miraculous after 10 years. So first thing we'll show is changing the needle. So I have just this little, I wouldn't even call that a screw, a little like knob right there. I might be able to get it with my hands, but you can see there's a slight notch there. So I'm going to use one of those tools I talked about earlier, because that's the easiest way to do it. And then I'll show you. So there's a lot of different types of needles too, so that might be a reason why you want to change them. If you're just sewing, like on cottons, you'll just need a standard, these are even the ones that came with my machine, a standard one. I have some denim needles somewhere for, again, denim or heavier weight. If you're sewing on knit materials like a jersey, there is a specific needle for that. It's called, I think it's like a ball point. It has a little bulbous end so that it doesn't snag the fabric. If you have a heavy duty machine and you wanted to try sew leather, you could do that. There are truthfully an overwhelming amount of sewing machine needles when you go to the store. So I definitely recommend looking up the ones that are recommended for your personal model. Okay, so I have this little tool again. This time I'm going to be using this edge. It just slips right in here. And I definitely recommend that you, one, put your presser foot down. It just makes it a little bit easier. And then two, you're probably going to want to hold your needle so that it doesn't drop down into the cavity. And then you would also definitely want to have your needle unthreaded. And then you just loosen it. You don't even need to loosen it all the way. 2 little twists is all it takes. You can see there, I have my needle pulled out. I don't actually need to change my needle. There is, on most needles, there's kind of a flat back. I don't think you'll be able to see, but there is a flat side. That is the side that goes toward the back of the machine. So when you're putting it in, there is a right way to put in the needle. So make sure that flat part is facing the back. You'll just kind of slide it up. And when it's up there and you can't push it any further in place, again, you just want to make sure you're holding it. And then go ahead and either with your hands or your tool, just tighten it back in place. So it's pretty simple to change your needles. Again, that'll probably be the maintenance piece that you consider probably second most, because the next piece is cleaning it. So every machine is slightly different. Mine I can access here. Tammy's, we know her the bobbin cavity is up at the top, but either way, you're going to get some dust that collects down there. So hopefully your machine came with a little bristle brush like this. Mine actually doubles as a seam ripper. And you just want to get in there and collect any dust that's sitting there. You can get in there, and there are ways to, remove certain pieces so that you can do a deeper clean. Because again, especially if you're using your machine frequently, just the little particles from your fabric and your thread will kind of get clogged up there, and it can definitely limit your machine's working capabilities. Okay. 2 other things. Now that I actually pulled out my seam ripper, I will show you all. This is another tool, one that hopefully came with your machine. If not, they're incredibly affordable. To use it, it's just a small, sharp little piece. I would just take the stitch that I'm going to rip out, probably go through and pick a couple of those stitches out. And you just slide it, you slide the little point underneath, you rip it, and then I like to pull the fabric apart because it'll let you kind of start to rip the seams apart, and then you can come in here. And I don't know if you can actually see your stitches coming apart, and you can get in there and undo them. So this happens a lot when you sew. There will be times when a seam did not come out the way you thought it would, when you didn't follow directions, anything like that. And that's the nice part. You really can't undo anything. You might get frustrated. You might need a little break from your project. But it's really nothing you can't undo. The only, the part that's a little bit harder to undo would be where we backstitched. Again, because that's typically 2 to 3 stitches, but nothing that can't be undone. Okay. And next, I will show you all how to sew a buttonhole. So, Tammy, I would love to know what your buttonhole settings are in your machine, because the computerized ones, I think they're so much nicer. The manual ones are okay, but the computerized ones, like some of them, you can just like click the button and it does it all for you. You don't have to do anything. But a buttonhole is another frequently used stitch. So again, I can see my stitch is undone. I would just pick out my spare threads and you are good to return to sewing. So my buttonhole foot on my machine looks like this. So you can see here, this is where it'll clip in to the presser foot. And then it actually slides. Let's see. So this piece here slides. So essentially we'll be stitching and the buttonhole. I guess on my machine, I couldn't make a buttonhole that's bigger than about 2 inches. I have never needed that, so I'm okay with that. And then up here is actually a space to put your button. So this right here is adjustable to your button size. So again, this is what it's like on my more manual machine. I'll go ahead and grab a button. And it is nice because it's very customizable to whatever size button you have. And are you really a sewist if you don't have a jar of buttons? I've accumulated a lot of buttons over the years because anytime somebody knows that you sew or you have a sewing machine, they like to share those goodies that they don't personally have use for, but they know that a sewist might. So I'll push my buttonhole presser foot up. There's little notches for the button to kind of sit in place. And then I'll push it down so it kind of sandwiches. Ooh, I have to use 2 hands for that, excuse me. So that it holds it in place. Okay, so my button is in my buttonhole presser foot. To release my other one, so I put the foot up, and then on my machine there is a little tab right at the back there. You just pull that up and it drops right down. And now the same way you put it in is you do have to hold this tab because there's a little metal bar that holds it in place. So I will go ahead and hold that tab up. And the button and that long piece of plastic go at the back. So I'm holding that lever up, sliding it into place and letting it go. The buttonhole or the buttonhole stitch is actually over here on my stitch length adjuster, and then down on my stitch selection piece as well. So there's 2 different areas we need to adjust, actually 3, because we'll need to adjust our width as well. Since this is, excuse me, since this is a stitch that, you know, obviously goes back and forth because there's a little bit of width to it. We'll need, I usually put my stitch width on the largest or the longest setting. Okay. And then this one, since it's such a wide piece and there's nowhere to kind of slide your thread in like this one, I usually turn the stitch control, let it go down once, and then kind of slide something under there like your seam ripper to pull that thread so that it's under your presser foot instead of over top. So again, for my settings, I need to go ahead and make sure that I have this on the buttonhole selection, that I have this one for my length. There's this area here that indicates buttonhole. It can be anywhere in there and it won't have any issues. And then for my width, I'll put it on 5. There you go. There we go. All right. So just the same way we've been doing, go ahead and lower that presser foot. This one, that's why I don't love it on mine. I don't know if it's because it's plastic. It doesn't feed the fabric through very well. So a lot of times I have to push a little bit more manually It's not my favorite feature on this machine. And sometimes it takes a little bit of adjusting or even going back because I didn't like the way the stitches looked. But I should be able to kind of feed that fabric through. Oh, and I know what I did wrong. So there is, I always forget about this, on this machine, there is a little lever in the back here that says, gosh, it might be a little tricky to see. It says push. And there's the buttonhole symbol on it. So when I push down, now you can see it. So this is where, so this piece of plastic on the buttonhole presser foot, as it pushes forward, once it clicks this, it'll make it go up, and then it lets the presser foot know that it's time to go back down the other side. So again, every machine will be a little bit different. But that is how the buttonhole works on my personal machine. We'll try that again. Hopefully this works. My needle came unthreaded there. It's because the thread that I had like left over was a little bit too short, so that'll happen. That's why I usually try to leave 4 to 5 inches of thread, because it likes to just pop out. Okay, now we should be good. I actually ran out of bobbin thread there. So that definitely happens a lot when you're sewing. A little bit annoying, but it's just kind of part of it. First is when you have like a really long stitch, like maybe you're sewing the inseam of a pair of pants and you get all the way to the bottom and you realize you ran out of your bobbin thread like halfway down the pant. So you're like, okay, I guess I'm starting that one over. Again, once you get the hang of working with your machine and threading it and pulling up that bobbin thread, it takes just a few seconds. One thing I love about this machine is the storage right there. It's very easy when you're running out of something or you need to replace your presser foot. It's right there in front of your work. All right, 3rd time's the charm. So, yeah, as I mentioned, sometimes my machine's buttonhole function just is not the greatest. So it was kind of bunching up there, and this foot that should have been coming forward has not been. So, ideally it would have been right about there. And it would have popped that into place. So the way you can kind of do this manually is to switch your stitch length, because now I need to do the crossbar of the stitch, and it'll just be so I switch it back to 1, do a short stitch length. Oop, and it is really locking up there. So we'll just say buttonhole is not happening today. And y'all will be able to see why in just a minute. Because unfortunately, my machine is at buttonhole foot. So you can see here, it got really bulky. That is not what we want our buttonhole stitch to look like. We want it to look more like this one here, where it's not all tangled up. So that means I have an issue down with my bobbin thread. So I'll have to untangle that, which again doesn't happen too frequently. It's nothing to stress about. You just might need to get under there with a pair of scissors, and then probably need to get in. I had to cut that loose. That one did not work, but actually this one doesn't look too bad. You can imagine what a buttonhole would look like. Sometimes it works. It worked on the last project I did. Sometimes it's just a little bit fussy. And now you can see in here, I do have some tangled threads. So I would just go ahead and pull my bobbin out and then make sure I pull those remaining threads out, because that can get tangled up and it'll prevent your machine from being able to stitch. So kind of good that y'all got to see this, because again, that's kind of it's a basic maintenance piece, and it's an issue that, again, hopefully you don't run into too often, but when you do, it's not a big deal. Nothing to stress about, and I would just need to put my bobbin in again. Okay. So again, aside from the other stitches that I already showed you, the buttonhole one is probably going to be if you're sewing clothing, or if you need to, I don't know. I've used it before on bags, like drawstring bags, to protect the drawstring piece where it would go in. But that might be one that you use with some amount of frequency. So again, when you're sewing, this is the general layout of a machine. Every machine looks a little bit different. Your stitches are pretty much always going to be to the right here. If it's computerized, there will probably be a little display and several buttons to select from. You might also, if it's computerized, these levers might not be here. It might be something that you input. But as long as you have your machine threaded, you know how to wind your bobbin, and you know how to adjust your tension and play around with your stitches, you will be able to sew. So now I'll go into just some of the things to consider if you're trying to purchase a sewing machine, or even if you have one at home and maybe are wondering if it's the right fit or if it's too intimidating. So when purchasing a machine, again, prices range from $99 to, of course, several thousand. Singer, Brother, and Janome are typically ones that you can get for less than $200 if you're buying like a starter model. They're great machines. Again, this machine I've had for 10 years. It is I think probably one of the least expensive ones that Singer makes, and it has all of the basic functions that I need. So another question to consider is, what do you plan on using a sewing machine for, personal or commercial? So if it's just, you enjoy sewing, you want to have a machine available, and you think you'll, use it a few times a month or even less. You really don't need anything heavier duty than what you can get at, Joann's or Michael's. There are professional grade commercial sewing machines available for purchase. Those are the ones that'll get you into the several thousands. You can sew leather on those. You could sew every day on those. So again, if you have decided you want to make this into a business or really explore it, you can go that route. Kristen already asked about the difference between the heavy duty and just the standard ones. As I mentioned, heavy duty, just a stronger motor, a little bit higher price point, but it will allow you to sew through more fabric, which I'm really excited about, because even just sometimes when I'm sewing a waistband or a hem, sometimes there's so many layers of fabric there that it can get clogged a little bit more easily. So I'm excited about that. If you are interested in quilting, there are machines that are made specifically for this purpose. A lot of times they'll have a longer arm. So essentially you can fit more fabric under the machine itself. And some of them will even have, digital quilting stitches built in. So that's something to consider. You can, of course, quilt just on a basic machine. You might need to use smaller projects. And then specialized features, embroidery stitches. There are definitely a lot of machines out there now where they have embroidery beyond the ones that you kind of saw with my machine. And then computerized stitches as well. So here are some popular brands. Singer, I think probably one of the most iconic silhouettes. Again, the machine pictured here on the left is the one that I have. One on the right is vintage. Brother, Tammy's machine might look like the one on the left here. Again, this is a good example of a computerized stitch system to where you would you would adjust your stitch length and width using the digital display. Whereas the one on the right, again, has those manual functions where you turn the knob to select your stitches, you press down on the little lever to make it go back. The computerized versions are usually a little bit higher price point. Husqvarna Viking. This is the machine I learned to sew on. Someday they're definitely a little bit pricier, but they're wonderful, high quality. And I think I want to say Joann Fabrics, their like sewing center definitely has a lot of Viking products. Janome, also a great brand. And those are just some of the things to consider. So I know we're at 11:30. Let me see, were there any other?
Yeah, Kristen had a couple of questions.
Oh, awesome. On a computerized or non-computerized version. Let me switch my camera background so y'all can see me. So learning to sew on a computerized or not computerized. As someone who did both, I had a computerized machine at school and a 1960s manual machine that I could use at home. I think there are some features like the buttonhole. Again, that's a feature I don't particularly care for on my personal machine. And it turned out beautifully on Tammy's.
Yeah, I just followed your directions and I used a big button.
See,
I found the biggest button I could find. Try to get that on there.
That's so great.
Button. Yeah, so this is the buttonhole. This is the buttonhole for this button.
Perfect. Okay, so another note that I didn't really get to make because my buttonhole was not successful today. So once you have your buttonhole created, you can take your you can actually use your seam ripper for this. I like to. I recommend so we'll just pretend that I have two bars of stitching here. You would take a pin, place it at the end of one end of the buttonhole. So this will prevent us from cutting through the bars at the end. And then you would just stab and rip. And the pin that you put in place will prevent you from ripping through those stitches. Yeah, so yes,
it sewed it a straight line. When it did it, it sewed it a straight line, and then it came all the way back, and then it went like this.
Yes.
And then it sewed it a straight line, and then it did the curve, and then it sewed it a straight line, and then it did this, and then it zigzagged back. So it was like heavy duty. I was like, I wouldn't be able to know how to, even know how to do that. But
No,
yeah,
it's
it gave me
definitely
an error when I was trying to do it with the other foot on the bottom. It was like,
yeah, see, I'm telling you, the computerized machines, they're very smart.
yeah, they're gonna say, yeah, you can't do a buttonhole with that foot. It's not gonna help us.
Really
Then
can't.
my thing came down too at the back. It came down, and it had to be in the front of it. I thought it had to be in the back of it. I put it in the back of it, and it just kept going up and down. I'm like, that's probably not the right spot. So then I put it over, and then it started moving forward. So yeah, you just kind of have to figure it out. Whatever works.
Yes. So Kristen, that is something to consider if you're looking to learn. I think, again, there are some features on a computerized machine that are really beneficial. I think the buttonhole is going to be superior on a computerized machine every time. I do like being able to manually adjust my stitches. I like being able to turn the knobs. That might be something on a computerized one that you just maybe need to read the instruction manuals a little bit more in depth on. But the features, overwhelmingly, the mechanics of the machine are going to be the same. With a computerized one, the only thing is some of the stitches just might come out a little bit easier. So definitely for someone who's new, if you're looking to purchase a machine at some point in the future, I would just consider how frequently you're going to use it and what you're willing to spend. Even the new one I just purchased is a manual because I wanted heavy duty. And I don't even know if they make heavy duty computerized ones. They might, but I would imagine they're a little bit more expensive. And then I see you have another question. South County, yes, that's right, they do have a makerspace. That would be an interesting. So I don't work for the library system. I'm a full-time social worker. I know at various points, I know Christine and I have talked about this because I believe North County also has a makerspace. And then of course, Main Library used to have one. I don't know what current library staff knowledge is on using sewing machines. I would not be opposed to, and this is more of a question for Christy, I would not be opposed to being a outside contractor presenter at a library that also has a makerspace.
Or something else we could consider is,
because all these sewing machines that were at Maine went up to North County, and right now they don't have someone there that will be able to. I mean, you can go in and you can make an appointment and you can use the machines, but from what I've heard, because no one knows how to use them, they don't know if they're in working order.
I know you and I had talked about offering one of our sewing basic sessions where if people had their own sewing machines, possibly bringing them in. We just need to make sure we had enough power strips so that people could plug in and use them. And so that might be something we could visit in the future as a compromise. It would be a group session, but it would give you an opportunity for some one-on-one help with something that you may have a question about.
Yes, and that's definitely something, now that I own 2 machines, I think that will be something Christine and I definitely are looking to plan. For me personally, I'm thinking early 2024, because I think it would be, again, most of the people who come to programs tell me that they have a machine at home that they're just not sure how to use. I've had folks actually bring in their own sewing machines to programs. Like Christy said, our only challenge at Independence would be getting a couple power strips in there. So I would say, Kristen, stay tuned. Again, I'm not library staff, so unfortunately I can't say, yes, I'm gonna do book librarian sessions at the South County Library. But I can say that I would like to have a few in-person sewing machine programs at Independence. And then be the easiest thing to sew. Highly recommend a basic bag. Whether it's drawstring or a simple tote bag, they're really great for learning how to get comfortable with the sewing machine. And again, truthfully, if we're thinking about in-person programming, that would be what I would choose to have our project be, is a bag. Simple, can be done in a short amount of time, doesn't require the same kind of technical knowledge that sewing clothing does. However, if you are interested in learning how to sew clothing, I think that one of the simplest things to learn how to sew is a pair of like drawstring or elastic pajama pants. That, you know, super simple, doesn't need to look beautiful when you're done with it, and doesn't need to be an expensive starting project, but that'll give you a really good understanding of how we shape two-dimensional fabric to a three-dimensional figure, because that is definitely kind of a skill all on its own, is sewing clothing. That's my preferred sewing project, so I can speak to that, especially if we're doing in-person programs. I can kind of start doing, you know, these are the basics. Would we necessarily sew pants and clothing in that class? Maybe not, but we can talk about how to read a pattern, any specialty tools you'll need, and some of the just basics of construction. But again, just getting comfortable with the sewing machine, learning how to use it. Highly recommend a bag. Maybe if you like quilting, maybe a small like quilted pot holder or pillow, a classic pillow, like you're in home ec again. So those are my recommendations. Anything that's not too many different pattern pieces, not any strange shapes, just kind of simple rectangles, squares, no fancy stitches, unless you want a decorative stitch. So that would be my recommendation. And there's so many free patterns on the internet. And then also you can buy like paper patterns. Give me just a second. I'll show you all some of my paper patterns. Again, since my preference, I guess, specialty is garment sewing. You can get these at any craft store, but I think Joanne Fabrics tends to have the largest selection. So they come in little packets like this, go when they're on sale, because otherwise they're like $15 to $20, but if they have a sale, they're going to be like $2 to $3. I have a vintage one, 1960s. And that, like I said, I would like to have a program in the future around how to sew clothing. And a huge part of that is learning how to read patterns, and also just understand how to shape fabric to our bodies. But they definitely have patterns for simpler projects like bags or household items. Great questions. Thank you, Kristen. I'm trying to think. So behind me, so I have a pegboard with my sewing and knitting tools. So I'll show you a few others that, again, not by any means required. They're things that I've acquired over the years, but that I find really helpful. So this is very fun for me. I get to show off my sewing room. So these are my cutting tools. I've just been using literally like the cheapest. I've had these since I learned to sew when I was 14. They still work great. But I'll show you. So I have these shears. I think, Tammy, you've gotten to use these at some of my in-person programs. They're really nice. The brand is Ginger. Range from about $30 to $50. But they, oh my gosh, it's like cutting through butter. Highly recommend buying a pair of fabric shears. Again, you can go a little bit higher end. These cost about $10. I've been using them for 12 years. So you can't go wrong, but it'll definitely make life a lot easier as opposed to trying to use just like traditional crafting scissors or household scissors. This is a rotary cutter. See, the blade pops out there and then you can pop it back in. So I have a cutting mat on the floor behind me. I recently purchased these items and it's wonderful when I'm cutting out a project. Instead of like crawling on the floor with scissors, now I can just lay it out, come in here with this little thing. This is not expensive. This is maybe $15. The cutting mats, a little bit pricier, but you can get really good coupons and sales. Sewing doesn't have to be as expensive of a hobby as some people might think. And then these are my pinking shears. So you can see, you can see there that it's a jagged edge. So this is actually another way to finish raw edges of fabric without needing a sewing machine. If you cut a raw edge of fabric with these, it won't fray. So that's a nice, I don't know, for me, it was a fun little purchase. Sometimes I don't feel like doing an overlock stitch. Or you might
remember cutting out that's what we used to cut out the pattern. Because we didn't cut it straight, we used the peaking at the edges.
Yes.
When we sewed, our edge was always, angled like that. But now it makes sense why they did that. I didn't know that before. Thanks.
Yes. Yeah, so these are a fun tool. As far as other things, especially if you're going to do garment sewing, I recommend a fabric marker. This is great if you are going to be marking, like if you were sewing a pair of pants, that pattern would show you where you want your buttonhole to be, and you would go ahead and mark that with, something that'll wash off. They also make like pencils, and somewhere I have chalk. Bobbins, I already mentioned. I have an extra 4-pack. You can get these at Walmart. Walmart actually has a really nice selection of sewing supplies. They also have quite a bit of fabric depending on the Walmart that you're at. I like my quilting cottons even for clothing. Let me show you all. I'll just for fun show you all the current project that I'm working on. So these are a pair of pants. They're going to be high-waisted, wide-legged. I've actually already sewn a pair with a different fabric. And again, this is just quilting cotton from Joann's. It's not very expensive, a few dollars a yard, a zipper. So all that to say, you can sew on a budget. And I'm very excited to now have 2 sewing machines, because that means I will be thinking of the logistics and talking with Christy, because I would love to be able to share. You can do a lot more with the sewing machine. In your take and make kits, if you picked one up, I did include a little hand sewing kit, and just in case we had time to get to it today. But today was really more about sewing machines, and you all had some wonderful questions, so I don't mind that we talked about machines the whole time. That's kind of my preference anyway. I think if there's any other, a pin cushion. So we'll actually be making pin cushions next month. I'm very excited. They're going to be little, so this one is just the classic tomato one. So we're going to be making ones that look like pumpkins. I'm very excited. So you'll definitely want a pin cushion if you're sewing. Let me think, any other supplies?
Well, the other thing that we used, and maybe you don't use this, is we had the roller that made the dots.
Oh yes, I have.
So we'd go around and it would dot on our, so it wasn't a marker and it wasn't a thing, it was a dotter that would make the dots on the fabric. So once you
Yes,
cut it, the dots, of course, aren't there anymore.
like the little it's like filled with chalk, and as you roll, the chalk comes out. Yes, I have that.
Well, it's not chalk, it just makes dots. So it's a
Oh,
roller with like little spikes on
I
it,
I do
and then you
have
would just
that
roll
one.
down it, and then that's where you would cut.
I
Instead
think
of using the chalk, it would do that.
I have one of those, but I frequently use it with I don't know what the technical term for it is, like transfer paper, like essentially colored paper, and then to transfer your marks, especially like with if you're going to be sewing darts or pleats or anything like that. That's my favorite way to mark it. I think it just easier to see, lasts longer. I'm gonna peek in my little sewing caddy here because I know I have a few more things. So actually have the marker that Tammy was talking about. You can see here it has a jagged edge, and yes, this one doesn't seem very sharp though. Like it would, I don't think that would make a dent.
It would be very mild, like.
But I do have transfer papers, plenty enough. This is all from the little sewing kit that again I purchased when I was a freshman in high school. You can find the exact same kit at Joann Fabrics for probably about $15 to $20. Here I am 12 years later still using it. And then I do like this kit came with an adjustable scale or ruler. So this is really helpful, especially when you're measuring seam allowances, since it has a little slider on there that lets you change it. So if you had, you knew you had to get down to a 1/2 inch seam allowance, or you had a hem that you needed to turn up 1/2 inch, this is a tool that I like to use because I can kind of hold this at the edge of the fabric and then just go along to see, using the little marker, if it lines up with the seam allowance or the hem allowance that's needed. Anything else? Oh, this is the chalk tool I was talking about, where you can kind of roll and you can change the, I'm almost out. You can change the color of chalk. You can get dark or light depending on your fabric. This is a little bit more frequently used, I think, in like tailoring and alterations. Those are most of my tools. Again, a lot of them I've had for over a decade at this point. A lot of my tools I've purchased using coupons or waited until they were on sale. And even my fabric, as I mentioned, especially if you're getting into any sewing bags or any household goods, just buy cotton fabric. Again, you could get it at Walmart. It's not too expensive. You can do little projects like we made these in our class, and then I went home and tried to make them on the sewing machine, and they came out so much better. Like I made a little at-home sponge, so this might be a next upcoming on the machine project because they turned out so much better on the machine. And this wasn't too complicated either, but so yeah, just there are so many different things you can do as you're learning to sew. And I'm very excited now to have the ability to bring both of my machines in. So please be on the lookout. Christy and I usually get my programs to Christy about 2 months in advance. So be on the lookout for updates soon about what our next programs for the rest of the year and the beginning of 2024 will be.
In a couple of weeks, I'll be doing the calendar for November, December. So, and those will be in-person programs. It's just because of early voting that we had to make these online. And so that worked out well. But yeah, we definitely, I think the room is big enough to handle multiple sewing machines, and we can just get some power strips out there and, give it a go, see how it works. And I'll let Cindy come up with the project idea
I'm
and
very
everything.
excited. Yes, I'm really thinking for the first one, I think like a small tote bag or small pouch, something simple, something everyone can use. And then maybe from there, seeing our interests and how many folks have sewing machines, and maybe trying to branch out, do a little series on sewing clothing, possibly. Lots of exciting ideas. So stay tuned.
Does anyone else have any questions?
Thank you, Kristen.
Okay, it looks like Jen left. I know there were some people that they had wanted to participate today. I did reiterate to everybody that even if you couldn't make it today, that the program will be recorded. So if you missed something or you want to go back and review something that was discussed, it will be posted on the library's YouTube page soon. And so that way you can go back and review. And we hopefully will have it up within about a week or so that you can, and I'll send an email out to everybody who registered so that you know, as soon as it's posted, I'll share with everybody, say, hey, it's online, it's live now. So if you want to go back and review it, you can. So yeah. Oh, you're welcome, Maida. I hope I pronounced your name correctly. And
Yeah,
yes, and
I love this because now I've unpacked my machine, so now I can, you know, see what I
Just say
can
now
do.
you're ready to start a project right now. Like,
I know, I'm like, oh, now I have to go find a project.
yeah, I just have to go look for patterns now.
I know it. So funny.
um,
Like I go to the senior center, and a lot of those ladies do, you know, do a lot of stuff like that. So probably could say, hey, what do you think? What can I do? You know,
I'll definitely have some good ideas. And
I have tons of fabric because when Katie was at North County, she had a thing where you could come in and get fabric because she had it. So I have like a whole box here of fabric that's all kinds of different stuff, but it's like just pieces of things. So,
yes,
you know, because when you quilt, that's what you do. It's pieces of things. So
yes.
it's like I could just practice. That's what I did. I just grabbed something.
Yeah. And I'm gonna say I do like the sponges. Like I said, these were I modified. Like I found some patterns online. It's, you know, cut up an old towel. I did go out and buy like netting. I just got it at Joann's. And then quilting cotton. And then inside is 1/2-inch polyester quilting batting. And I ended up the first few ones I made, the batting would just move around a lot. So I ended up stitching it to the quilting or to the cotton fabric and then stitching them together and flipping them, and just making sure I left like 1/2 inch of seam allowance, or not even seam allowance, 1/2 inch when I was sewing on the outside of the batting.
That's your height.
But
Yeah.
now like we've been using these at my house. We put them in the washing
So
machine.
what do you put inside? What kind of material are you?
It's so it's just the batting. I don't know if you can see, this one's not closed up. So
Yeah.
1/2 inch polyester. I got like, I think a yard of it. Again, we made these in
Got
our
it.
program, and then I thought, you know, I might have a better way to do this. And then this mesh, and then just cotton fabric.
So you sewed the mesh onto a random fabric piece, and then
I
you sewed it. Got it.
So I sewed, here's my batting. I sewed it onto the cotton fabric, and I did just like 2 stitches down the middle. And then I stacked the, so this is my quilting fabric. I put the mesh underneath, and then underneath that was the towel, sewed around the batting, left a good 2 to 3 inches open, then flipped it, and then I'll hand stitch that closed. So it worked pretty well. Again, that might be a project we revisit.
Yeah. Well, thanks again for everybody coming out today. Stay tuned. Next month's program will also be online. We'll have the kits together for the pumpkin pincushion because in October will be the general election for municipal elections for Mecklenburg County. So everybody will be voting then at the end of the month. So yeah, Phil, I'll send a notice out whenever the kits are ready so you can pick them up, and hope to see everybody online again next month.
So the kits that you did for this program, I didn't come by and grab one. But were they just like the basic kits that you did for the other program? Okay.
Exactly.
Because I'd have to have you send the kit to Davidson for the next one.
Yes.
Oh yeah, if it's a different one, just let
Yeah.
me know if you're interested, and then I can
the,
send it to whatever branch you want to pick
yeah.
it up at.
That sounds
Yeah.
good.
Yeah.
All right, thank you.
Okay. Well, thanks everyone. I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording now, and that way we can get that to where it's saving.